I'm joined now by Politics and International Relations Professor Eduardo Gamarra. He's also the director of the Latino Public Opinion Forum at Florida International University. Eduardo, you just heard in Stephen Gibbs' story there, the state controller saying this action taken against Guaido is not a political move. Clearly, Guaido would see it differently. It seems like we're watching this back and forth between Maduro and Guaido, and in slow motion, really. As someone who watches this country and the region closely, what are you looking for in the near future?
Well, I think it's very hard to kind of point your finger at one specific thing, but clearly both sides are exacerbating tensions. The government now, by putting these sanctions on Guaido, is essentially doing what it has done historically, which is to judicialize politics, accusing opposition politicians of corruption, therefore banning them from politics. The partner of Guaido, Mr. Lopez, has been in jail for now almost 4 years, and this is exactly how it began. They accused him of corruption and eventually ended up in jail. So the possibility of jailing Guaido, I think, is something that we ought to be worried about, because I think that's sort of, if we're going to talk about a red line, maybe that's the red line that the government cannot cross. This is a step toward jailing Guaido, and I think it's a dangerous line to try to reach. So I would be looking at that very specifically for the next few days.
Yeah, the red line. You were on talking with us not too long ago about Venezuela, and at the time you said we might be on the brink of a confrontation because on one side you had the U.S. backing Guaido, on the other side Russia supporting Maduro. The U.S. president just this week saying Russia has to get out of Venezuela. He met with Guaido's wife. It seems like each side, in some respects, upping the ante. What are your concerns there?
Well, clearly, it's not good to see the Russian military presence in Venezuela today. I mean, Venezuela has had an agreement with Venezuela since 2007. Most of its armament is Russian. Its training is Russian, and so on. So they've been there for over a decade. But to do this kind of flagrant demonstration of Russian presence is not good, particularly because on our side, we are also saying, we are continuing to say that the military option is on the table. And so I think, this is not a moment to be rabble-rousing on either side, especially because, the level of tension that's present in Venezuela is extraordinary, considering that we are now in the second blackout in less than 2 weeks. And we are in a blackout that affects the water supply, that affects the gasoline supply, and of course, really also affects the food supply. So things are deteriorating rapidly in Venezuela, and if the military option on both sides is the most visible thing, then I think we need to be a little concerned about the future.
And Eduardo, let's talk a little bit more about that, because this isn't just about politics and major powers. Right. It is about the people who suffered through hyperinflation. They can't get meds. In many cases, they can't get food. Many of them fleeing. We're seeing this exodus. Now, on top of that, as you mentioned, 4 days of power outages. Just how dire is the situation on the ground there in Venezuela?
It's very dire. Not only, I think the most clear example of this is what's happening in hospitals around the country. You now have several people who have died owing to the lack of attention, the lack of medication, but also if you add to the lack of power in hospitals where patients might be undergoing dialysis or even in the middle of an operation, and patients are being severely affected. But then just think about the food supply. The entire food supply chain in Venezuela has been affected. And I think we're going to have really a couple of consequences. The humanitarian crisis is exacerbating by the minute, and we're going to see this continuous flow out of Venezuela, which is not only depleting the country of human capital, but it's also having an impact on neighboring countries, which really are now reaching the point of saturation, where they can no longer take in as many refugees as they have been, and particularly the case of Colombia, for example.
Yeah, it really is indeed dire. Yeah. Eduardo, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome.